clay the same way, is as ordinary as a material. It's my interaction with the medium. In a creative way, when you engage with the medium, that process itself becomes magical.
Hello everyone, welcome to Tuesday Talk Season 2, where we talk with the leading voices of India in art, architecture and design. Today, I'm with Rahul Kumar, ceramic artist, curator and art writer with an eclectic practice spanning 25 years. Welcome Rahul, it's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me in this lovely conversation.
So, when I was reading your writing about experience of art practice, I was caught up in the word that how you found clay magical. That would you care to elaborate on that experience? Because it might be difficult to put it into words, but still, how is that something as ordinary or something so close to nature can be so magical for an artist?
No, so that's an interesting question. But come to think of it, if you step back, all material is actually ordinary, right? Paint can be used to paint your walls or to make paintings. Stone is all around us, and then sculptors are going to carve amazing imagery and amazing works and forms in stone. So clay the same way, is as ordinary as a material, in our everyday life, everywhere. What I found was my interaction with the medium. In a creative way, when you engage with a medium, that process itself becomes magical. And in a medium like clay, which becomes heavily driven by the process, this whole idea of magic in process accentuates, as compared to possibly a painter making a painting using color on canvas. So clay really demands a lot of sort of process, preparing of the clay itself, forming, allowing it for a slow dry, but it has to dry completely before you put it in the kiln for firing, and then the whole firing process. So I think, and then by the way, it doesn't end there. You open the kiln, get the material out, you still need to really take a lot of care. It topples and falls and it breaks. So I think just interaction and working with the medium makes it magical, for me at least.
I have read that you found or you discovered the magic of clay as a child, and now that after having decades of experience in making and playing with clay, how important is the idea of play for you in your artistic practice?
Sort of personally speaking, I think it's incredibly important. And I mean, that also sort of originates from two references specifically. One, the medium itself demands a lot of acceptance of what happens when you create something, but something different comes out of the kiln. The fire has a role to play, and there's only that much you can control, by the way, right? Slightly higher temperature or slightly lower temperature. Where in the kiln did you keep the ware? Were the flames directly hitting it? What was next to it? And were there fumes from that impacted? So you cannot control everything, and therefore the idea of acceptance of what comes out of the kiln and what happens in the process is quite intense when you're working with clay. So I think the play and experimentation automatically becomes part of your DNA in that sense. But for me, very specifically also, being from the corporate world, and even now when I'm out of the corporate world, but I curate exhibitions, I write journalistically, I do a lot of other things. the idea of play gets sort of incrementally reduced in some of those roles. There is a certain expectation. You're part of a structure, and there's a certain rhythm to that life. So when I come to the studio and when I work in clay, I think all of the experimentation and playfulness sort of automatically comes with the work. So I think both of it. I think my sort of life structure experience, as well as what the medium itself demands. I think both of those really do nudge you to become playful and experimental.
Sir, you have characterized experimentation as an attitude that you keep in your practice. And so, would you care to elaborate on how integral experimentation is, especially with a medium such as clay, where risks and accidents are sort of inevitable?
I think clay demands a lot of acceptance of the unexpected, right? If I can put it like that. But yes, taking that one step further, the experimentation is an attitude, and which I do truly believe in, and I find to a great extent, a lot of saturation comes in very quickly in a lot of other contemporary practices that I see, not ceramics necessarily, just contemporary artists, making works which are repetitive, and sticking to sort of one idea because you've established yourself with that sort of style. I think that experimentation starts to take a back seat with a lot of those practices. So, yes, I completely agree with the fact that it is an attitude to experiment, to keep pushing yourself, the process, the medium, every time you get into the studio and create something. And I'm glad that I subscribe by that approach, and therefore over the years, there is a continuity of a thought, there is a continuity of if I can call a style, but because the whole approach is to try and do something different and new, there has been an evolution as I look back at my own works.
I'm sort of curious to know about the break in your conceptual framework that led to preferring sculptural exploration over functional forms.
Right. We can very comfortably and safely blame my master's program, which I was able to get to on a Fulbright scholarship. So up until I went for my MFA in a university in United States, I really practiced as a potter, and the biggest challenge really was to make a perfect bowl or a pitcher or a teapot that will pour just nicely. The beverage is not sort of dribbling and spilling. So those were the challenges, and obviously, this is one of my hand-thrown cups. The glaze is perfect and everything. Sort of the technicalities of the design and the firing and the process really became important. But when I was exposed to the idea of expression through what I make, I think that was a discovery, and that was a whole new realization. And I learned that I could use the medium of clay, and for a very long time I used the subject of a vessel, continuing with my roots as a potter, but to express, but to tell a story. So that entire narrative coming with what you're creating and the whole underlying stories and metaphors, that is something that I learned, in my master's program, and I was able to slowly practice that, imbibe, and bring that in my work. Now, after all of these years, I do feel very comfortable to call myself an artist. For a very long time, I would say I'm a potter. Mm-hmm. And then again, for a very, very long period after that, even after my master's, I would say I'm a ceramic artist because, again, I was really wedded to clay and everything was clay. Uh, Now, I think in the last 5 to 7 years, I've started, I mean, clay remains at the core of my practice, but along with clay, I work with other mediums. There are times I work with paper, I work with iron, I've worked with fabric. So other mediums come in, clay remains at the core. But yes, I finally feel comfortable to call myself an artist.
So you have noted that working with clay allows you to move beyond the cerebral and sort of have a connection to the core. So would you care to elaborate a little bit on what are these essential parts of yourself that are so sacred to you, so that gets enhanced through your work in clay, and what is your and second part is what's your question for what is your advice for young artists, other artists, to sort of safeguard and be connection to in connection to their core among this cacophony of distractions and other voices and their demands.
Right. So I think, I mean, it's not specific to clay as a medium. I think that's true for any medium. I think the vocation of being an artist, it is, and it's less about things that are secret in one's mind. It's not those. I think a creative journey allows for a lot of intuitive response. So everything you do, whether you're drawing, sketching, working in clay, or painting, you do plan and you do begin with something in mind. But there is a lot of things that you do which are decided at a subconscious level. So yes, you decide a particular form with which you will begin a certain clay and you begin that form. But there's a lot that happens while you're working very intuitively. I think that is what I mean, when I refer to, getting to the core. You may do a lot of those things, and once it is finished, you take a step back and see what you've created, and that will give you certain answers of why you're doing certain things. Let me take an example. For instance, there are certain works where you're looking for perfection, you're looking for a perfect line, you're looking for a perfect angle. And if that changes, you feel uncomfortable. You will erase it, redo it, remove it, and make another one if it's not really coming the way you want. There is another alternate approach where you do look forward for things that are completely organic. In fact, you look for imperfections, and if they don't exist, you create them, right? This may not be a very conscious, thought-through, strategy-like decision. It just naturally happens. And when you take a step back, once you've created what you've created and observe it as a viewer, it tells you so much more, not just about the work and the narrative, but probably about yourself, right? Yeah, and I think that is absolutely true for a creative journey and not specific to a medium necessarily.
So I want to come back to what you have said before about now exploring and experimenting more mediums, like you're now working on paper, iron. So how central is material to your practice as an artist who is developing his oeuvre so rapidly? What is that? What sort of role does a material play in your creative decisions?
I think medium brings in a lot with it, and both on the side of possibilities as well as constraints, right? And when you decide to work with a certain medium and a material, I think you need to be somewhat aware of both of these, right? I can work in clay and create three-dimensional forms, textures. There's a lot that I can do with it. But scale, sometimes, the idea of fragility that comes naturally with clay. So a lot of those are inherent, an integral part of working in clay, as against, say, if I create something in stone. It'll not be as fragile. It will come with a certain weight and a certain approach, as against paper, right? So medium is absolutely critical and important part of a creative journey, and it allows, like I said, for a lot of opportunities that are unique to the medium, but also a lot of constraints that are probably equally unique to the material itself.
Sir, you have worked as an art writer, a journalist in the cultural sector. So all that exposure, being immersed in the most important conversations in and around contemporary art and culture, how do you define the contemporary and what is not contemporary?
Interesting to sort of think about that. See, literal meaning of contemporary is the now, right? So very simplistically, everything that is happening right now is contemporary. That's happening in our time. But specifically, when you look at visual art practices and you start sort of to think about periods, so there was the sort of early traditions. There was a time that was defined as modern, and then there is postmodern, and then there is contemporary. So I think the big difference between anything that happened in the past versus contemporary, there are a couple of characteristics, right? So contemporary art globally is responding to deeply felt emotions, whether it is the external world environment or a personal narrative. It is art of the current time, and I think the purity of process and medium is somewhat sort of taking a backseat, and that's my personal observation. People may not agree with this, right? The purest attitude of being a ceramic artist is not that important for me now, as I call myself an artist and less of a potter maybe. It was incredibly important to get that glaze perfect, and if there was something, like a blemish on it or a technical issue with it, it's a bad piece. It's a rejection. Versus when you're working in creating a work of art by using clay. I'll take an example, right? I use dry clay on paper. I mean, it's just clay, the medium continues, but there is nothing of the attitude of a ceramist that was really put to use in that, right? So I think contemporary is really with no rules as such. Somebody uses stainless steel utensils, slaps them together and creates sculptures, and becomes one of the most recognizable contemporary artists from India, right? So yes, there are absolutely no rigid schools, there are no rules, and more often than not, deeply felt emotion rather than, the politics or the trend. I think those are a few things that will define what really becomes a good contemporary art practice globally.
So, sir, in conceptualizing your practice, a recurring idea is the politics of form. So, over the time, over these decades of experience, has that your core idea about it changed, or how do you do you reinterpret it in the right now through the politics of form?
Right. So I think, when you're working with any three-dimensional sort of three-dimensionality as your creative expression, uh, I guess it might be true for 2D also. When you're creating a form, it has references, whether you do it intentionally or not, but it will always have a certain understanding and a certain reference and a certain metaphor. A simple form or a color can have just so many interpretations and meanings. A square is the most stable, even form. Circle is not stable, but brings in the no start and a no end feel to it. There is a continuity when you deal with a circle. Red can mean anger, can mean fire, can mean destruction, but red also means celebration. Red also means fertility. So anything and everything will have multitudes of interpretation, whether it's a two-dimensional form or a three-dimensional form or a color. Everything comes with a baggage of understanding. And a good artist or a good maker will be aware and be intentional in choosing some of those things that supports the narrative that is attempted to be built, right? So it's not just the form, but it's everything with it and around it that you use and you're conscious of. And yes, in my journey of becoming an artist and therefore expressing through my work, those decisions have definitely become far more prominent and important in my process and creativity itself.
The idea of imperfection and discarding. So these you have mentioned it in one of the answers, but in your artistic practice, how integral is it? One side is key because you work with clay; it has its importance, but also in the larger framework of your artistic practice and concepts, this imperfection and discarding, the process of discarding, how does it uh, how does it get reflected in your
So yes, to begin with, I absolutely agree. I think it is an inheritance of working with clay. You do become very accepting of slight imperfections, or I mean, it's probably not just about imperfection. It's about you intending a certain thing, and what comes is slightly different, and you embrace it. So I think that idea is inherent in the process and the medium that I work with. But also as a concept, as a theme, I do really believe in imperfections and organic, that make my narrative complete. It's something that we don't think about or realize. Nature provides everything that is actually not perfect in the way we define perfection. There's no straight line in nature, right? When you tend to think of a forest, as kids, it will be all very dense green. There are always shades of brown. There are broken trees. There are broken branches. All of that is actually natural, right? A perfect circle and a perfect line just does not exist in nature. So the reality is all of it fits together, and that's what makes everything complete. So I think this perfection is very synthetic. It is inorganic. Uh, it is it is it is very forced. And it sort of does not fit into uh, my expression and narrative. Uh, you know, uh, so imperfection, or you call it organic, is what I resonate more with.
So, sir, you have made projects like the Platters installation with IFA and which was shown in the India Art Fair, and so which are like these spatial immersive experiences of art. So, what are the possibilities, especially working with the mediums you work with right now?
You know, and like we spoke about this some time back, the medium and material brings in possibilities and constraints. One of the constraints of clay is scale. It's not simply possible to create something extraordinarily large in a sort of a single block of clay, for instance. I mean, you've got a full-fledged temple created out of one block of stone. That's a possibility of stone. But in clay, you can do that in bits and pieces and sort of things coming together. You can make a full building-sized mural, but then those are individual specific sort of smaller tiles coming together and forming the large. So clay does bring in that inherited constraint with it. Specifically when I talk about my practice and my sort of studio space, uh, this is a constraint probably that I've put for myself all this while. I do not work with any studio assistants whatsoever. As a result, the studio remains pretty dirty because even the cleaning will be something that I will do when I get the time and mind space to do. But I just like to work with my two hands, and that immediately and very quickly puts the constraint of how much I can do with literally just two hands. The size, the scale, the weight, the whole handling of it is practically, gets very defined and governed, the extent of it, right? I have for the first time worked with traditional potters to create something which is larger scale. This is the first time in the last 25 years of my practice that I've worked with someone to create something larger. But that's actually the point. If you work only yourself, there's only that much you can do in terms of scale. To create something large scale, and you're referencing Circle and Circle, the installation for which I got a grant from the India Foundation for the Arts. It was shown at India Art Fair at the curated section. It was curated by Girish Khan in 2015. It was finally also acquired by the Kirananda Museum. 101 platters on a single large wall as a project. There also, if you see, it was about 30 feet by 10 feet space, but 101 pieces came together to create that experience. So yes, the idea of scale, needs to be handled differently when you work with a medium like clay, or in a situation where I do not work with assistants. I literally work with my two hands and a limited studio space. But yes, that definitely provides you with the opportunity to create each piece with the same amount of intent and allow it to become larger and a part of a larger, right? I guess, the attention to every single component of that largeness is still, well within your hands, because, literally every single piece is made by you, with the same energy to get at.
No, I just want to add to that, and it is so antithetical to the current idea of this fastness, efficiency and productivity, this relentless rat race, and being the cogs in the machine sort of situation. So I really appreciate that sort of stubbornness in how you want to use your hands and keeping that sacredness of work.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think, I mean, if sort of there is another artist who is interested in a quick and large scale and or a repetitive, and they choose to work in a factory, or if they choose to work with multiple sort of helping hands, I'm not judging. I'm not saying that's good or bad. It is not something that I feel excited with. I say that many times, right? I left the corporate world to be able to sort of stay with arts and within the studio work with clay. And that's what I left it for. And if that's the best part, and I hand it over to someone else to do, and I become a manager, I should have actually continued in the corporate world. At least I would be getting a good salary, right? So I'm not going to leave all that to do this and then give it to someone else to do. And my role then becomes managing them. So that's not something that excites me. I'm not putting any rules, or I'm not judging. I'm not saying what others do is, if it works for them, that's great.
Yeah, I was referring to the general theme of that, that we have to do everything so fast. ऐसे, करना है तो.
So again, I'm not judging. If you feel karna hai, or you are in a hurry and you want to just do it, suit yourself. You want to smoke a cigarette? Sure, your lungs. Who am I to say that's right or wrong? I'm not. That's exactly the point, right? To each their own. Yes, it feels that everything. So I'm not going against the trend. I'm doing what excites me and what I feel like doing and how I feel like doing. There are a lot of things that I do which is part and parcel of the way the contemporary urban life is, right? I spend too much time on screen. I shouldn't, right? But that's where I'm getting at. I'm not against the people who are in a rush and a hurry. It's an observation that you may be missing out on a few things. But then again, who are we to sort of put any kind of rules or judgment? There are things that probably I'm missing out. By the way, it is absolutely right that there is a lot that I'm missing out by not working on really large scale. It is a fact. Someone mentioned, if you want to, beyond this point, get noticed, you will have to create large scale work. That's an opinion, probably correct, but I choose not to. Right? Probably I'm missing out on things by not being able to do the mass production, large scale, work with teams, work with people. Sure. And that's all right. So that's a decision that I'm making, right? But then inherently, something very interesting comes with it integrally. If I create something massive scale, just to be able to see the whole thing, you'll have to step 100 steps back, right? And a smaller scales actually invites you closer. So the way you interact with my work is something that I'm defining as a viewer. I'm saying, you know what, come close. Yeah. So suit yourself, whatever floats your boat.
So you operate simultaneously as a curator, as a maker, as a art writer, journalist. So how do these roles feed off each other, and how do they sort of play into your overall creative existence?
Yeah, so I do not know of anyone else, I'm sure they exist, who has an MBA and an MFA, who has had a corporate life of about 18 years and an artistic practice and a journey. So I think those, two very distinct skill sets and experiences, when I stepped out of the mainstream corporate roles, I felt that I really bring very distinct skill sets and mindsets, together, and I felt that I could really do something with bringing the two worlds, together. And that's when I, decided that I want to explore writing on art, because I felt either a lot of mass sort of media approaches it like a reportage, right? Very press release dependent and basically news and announcement sort of a situation, or it is very esoteric writing, which belongs to academic journals and books. But in between, where it is in a language that is very accessible, but coming from a space of knowledge, I think that space I felt was relatively less taken. And I wanted to bring in some of that, because articulation and ability to express clearly using the English language was something that I was comfortable with, and the education and experience and sensitivity of being an artist. So that is when I, expanded to journalism, and by also, my curatorial work. And absolutely, each one feeds off the other, each one feeds into the other, right? If I'm having a journalistic interview and a conversation with an artist, some of the most celebrated artists I've had the opportunity and honor to write about and, be in interaction with them, that definitely informs how I see creativity and creative practices, which has an impact in how I approach my own artistic journey. And that in turn will inform how I curate. And the sensitivity of process of attachment and detachment and a lot of things that goes on as an artist allows me to pose certain questions and interrogate, investigate other artistic practices, either as a curator or as a journalist. So I think, you are just one person, and like a sponge, you absorb everything. And then it becomes one, and then you release all of that in the various facets that you are involved in. So I feel extremely fortunate and blessed to be able to really bring all these worlds along with me. It's extremely enriching, and hopefully I'm able to also nicely contribute, and justify my presence in these various roles.
You have had decades of experience in the Indian and international cultural space.
A few decades, I'm not that old.
Yeah, with relevant experience. So, how do you view the cultural ecosystem, if that is suitable for ceramics and ceramics as a discipline in India?
Sure. So, again, ceramics practice requires a certain access to infrastructure, equipment, space. If you're working in clay, you need a separate space where you can, dirty the space, because you'll be wedging, preparing clay, letting it dry, etc. So there is a process involved when you work with clay. And then obviously the whole firing will require kiln, whether it is gas furnace or electric kiln, but you do require all of that paraphernalia and equipment. It's not as simple as just having a corner table in a room where you can sketch, if that's what you do. I think in the last about decade and a half, there has been huge sort of possibilities that have opened up to work with clay as a medium. Very often people say that ceramics is not accepted by the contemporary art galleries and all of the associated sort of the ecosystem. I have a slightly different point of view there. For whatever reason, and I think those reasons are also understandable, what ends up happening is that when you work with a practice like clay, there is a lot of time and effort that goes into understanding the science and the technique. In comparison to, let's say, again, painting, there are only those many ways that you can take the paint to the canvas. You can You can take the brush, you can take the knife, you can use your hands and fingers, or you can be Jackson Pollock to dribble the paint directly onto the canvas. But that's it. So very quickly you're able to understand and learn that, and therefore soon in the journey you begin exploring what is it that you want to do with that paint, right? What image and why? So you start asking those questions far sooner in the journey. uh, in, for example, if you're painting, right? um, but when it comes to ceramics, you spend a lot of time trying to understand the clay, prepare the clay, the nuances of it, the firing, the glazing, the temperatures. What is it that you want to do with the form that you want to create comes in, therefore, slightly later in that journey. As a result, you get very attached to the technique and the process. And sometimes it becomes difficult or impossible for you to detach yourself with it, right? So you do remain very attached to the craft of it. And therefore, the whole expression and the narrative and the metaphors, all of that comes in much later or takes a backseat. So I guess, what ends up happening very often with ceramics and maybe even printmaking, which are very heavily dependent on process and technique, that you spend so much time perfecting the craft of it that you get either too attached to it or do not begin the journey of expression, and therefore sort of taking it forward into the realm of art. So it's less about, in my mind, that galleries are not interested in showing ceramics. I think it is not the right idea. I think galleries are really open to show anything and everything, as long as it is truly coming with the narrative expression, and therefore fits into the definition of art.
I have a question that is for the young creative practitioners, who is, say, a young person who wants to start working with clay, who is curious about what it is to be an artist in the Indian contemporary art scene. What is your advice for them?
I think the advice is less about to become a ceramic artist necessarily. I think first, it's important to understand what is it that you want to do to be an artist. Why do you want to be an artist? What is it that you want to tell? What's your story? And then, yes, if you want to work in clay or any other medium for that matter, on why are you deciding to use a certain medium, or be attached to a certain process. Again, if you think about that, and you will yourself find the reasons. And if clay is you're calling for certain possibilities and opportunities that it provides you with, I think that is very naturally going to allow for that journey to sort of roll out, and make a good artist out of anybody. So do answer the two questions for yourselves. What's your unique story? Why is it that you want to be an artist? What is it that you want to tell the world, right? And when you have figured that out, how do you want to take it to the world? uh, you can be an artist and choose to write. You can make a film, right? All of those are telling stories, and that's a creative endeavor. But yes, to be a visual artist, yes, you can use paint or stone or printmaking or clay. But then, your decision and intention will give you that clarity, and be honest in that journey. And it's not difficult to be a good artist then.
Thank you so much, Rahul sir, for the time. It has been such an enlightening conversation, and we really appreciate your time and the sort of clarity you had about your practice and about the art space in larger.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast. It has been indeed a great conversation. I've really enjoyed your prompts and questions, and I sincerely hope it will be of interest to your viewers and listeners. Thank you.
And dear viewers, every Tuesday we come with a new leading voice in Indian art world, in design and architecture, and share their stories. Stay tuned. Thank you.